Hey cousins, welcome back to the YouTube channel. My name is Carly Jones and I'm an employment attorney at the Manifest Justice Law Corporation. Today, I'm not in my normal office. My home office is going through some renovations, and so I don't have the girls on camera with me, but I do have Mackenzie in the room with me, the chocolate lab. And so if you hear some moving around, that's her. And if you don't hear moving around, that's a shout out to our video editor, Sally. Thank you. Shout out, Sally, for editing those noises out. Okay, today we're going to talk about trauma. So, trigger warning, very blanket. I am not going to go into like any specific traumatic events or incidents. So, it's not that kind of a trigger warning. It's just a trigger warning because we're going to be talking about trauma and what it means to be a trauma informed lawyer. So, if hearing about trauma, talking about trauma, if any of that is in any way going to trigger you or upset you, I would pause this video and go grab a piece of chocolate or go grab your emotional support animal or your emotional support friend or your emotional support blankie and go grab your special treat and your cuddle bug and then come back to this video once you're ready. Okay. So now that everyone's ready and we're here to talk about trauma, let's dig into it. Okay, I have been working with folks and I have had experiences that tell me that it is important for me to share more explicitly what it means to be a trauma informed lawyer. It does not mean that I will be the therapist. It does not mean that I can be your therapist. It does not mean that I have equipped to be your therapist. It does not mean that you can talk shit to me and disrespect me in any old kind of way that you want to just because you're going through something. We're all going through some things. So, let's talk about what it means to be a trauma-informed attorney. But first, before we even get into that, let's talk about what does trauma mean? How is trauma even defined? How reliable? What's the political state? Like, there's lots of questions there. But according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, an event or series of events that causes moderate to severe stress reactions, it's called a traumatic event. Traumatic events are characterized by a sense of horror, helplessness, serious injury, or the threat of serious injury or death. Traumatic events can affect survivors, rescue workers, and friends and relatives of victims who have been directly involved. Victims, I mean, in more like modern and politically correct terminology, we say survivors instead of victims. That is a part of being a trauma informed attorney, knowing that difference. So that just describes what a traumatic event is, right? Something that creates horror or helplessness or hopelessness or some kind of threat of your immediate physical or emotional safety and well being. Okay. When you've experienced something at work that can fall under the category of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, you have likely experienced something at work that is incredibly offensive, incredibly oppressive, upsetting, can be an immediate threat to your physical and or mental and or emotional well-being, and it's likely that it would be categorized as a traumatic event. Traumatic events have the ability to impact people's psyches, their well-being, their sense of self, how they show up in the world, how they operate, the relationships they keep, their work opportunities and ability to show up at work. It can impact that for very short periods of time or very long periods of time. It can be very little impact. It can be large life-changing impact. Okay. So it varies. But what it means to be a trauma informed lawyer is very, very specific. There are very specific principles included in the definition of trauma informed lawyering. And the field of being a trauma informed or trauma aware lawyer is very, very new. This kind of training and education is just starting to come to law schools because I don't know if I've actually said this in other videos, but in the legal field, we are very far behind. We are very far behind. We're 10 to 30 years behind any other profession, which means that, like, when you're trying to introduce evidence that is only newly being recognized in like a scientific field or in a medical field, it's really difficult to get that new evidence recognized in a legal field, in a court of law, because we are very slow to adapt. We want to make sure that if we're introducing a new concept or theory or principle or way of recognizing evidence, anything that's new that's coming from a different field, we want to make sure that it's tried and true and tested and legitimate and verified, overly verified, triple verified, quadruple verified. We want to make sure that it's legitimate before the courts start implementing that as like fact and as truth. And so trauma informed lawyering is a very new practice that is built off of the vast amount of research and information that exists relating to trauma and how it impacts individuals, their families, and community members. And again, like anyone who's interacting with a trauma survivor. Vicarious trauma is very real. Vicarious trauma means when you haven't experienced a traumatic event yourself or the traumatic experience yourself, but secondhandedly, you're dealing with the person who has gone through a traumatic experience, like you're a friend, a family member, a community member, a lawyer, a therapist, like a person trying to help the person who has been traumatized. You can experience vicarious trauma or secondhand trauma yourself as the person who's trying to help because the person who has been traumatized can like pop off and treat you all kinds of crazy ways, or the way that they share their story and speak about what happened to them can again like trigger the person who's trying to help or influence the person who's trying to help. There's just a myriad of ways that vicarious trauma can happen, which is part of why having boundaries is so important. And that's part of why I want to make this video because I don't want there to be any misunderstandings about what it means to be a trauma informed lawyer. Trauma informed lawyer does not mean that your lawyer will become your therapist. A trauma informed lawyer means that your lawyer has an understanding, a deep understanding of trauma and how it affects you as the client and what your experience is in this legal field. So that means I'm looking out for and caring about your trauma at each step throughout the litigation and pre litigation process. It does not mean that we are the treating medical health professionals. So, some of the principles that exist in trauma informed lawyering, it's safety. So, for one example for safety is like your physical safety. So, when I'm meeting with clients in person, I am showing them where all of the exits are. I am giving them an option if they want to have their back toward the door or if they would rather be facing the exit doors. I am talking through and explaining what would happen in an emergency situation, a lockdown situation. I am showing them where the restrooms are. I have tissues on hand. Like there are so many various steps that I will take to make sure that folks' physical safety is protected. If it's a Zoom session, I'm telling folks that they can leave at any time, sign back in. I am assuring them that the meeting's being recorded and I'm using a note taker so that I can be present with them and still make sure that all of the information is recorded necessarily. There's like various things that we do to make sure that safety is established both in physical in-person appointments and virtually online having appointments with clients. Then there's trustworthiness and transparency. That's another principle. To me, that's like additional communication. You're going to communicate a lot, again, to be transparent with the client. You're going to talk to them about each individual step you're taking in the case and why. If they have questions, you answer them. If a question requires a meeting to have a further discussion and it can't just be answered over email, then you are making the time to have a meeting with that person. You're not just ignoring the email, you're setting aside that time. It means you're explaining things in depth and detail. And again, you're just being fully transparent. If you haven't gotten to something, you tell them you haven't gotten to it because you've gotten other clients or you've had other situations. If they're trying to vent to you and like share too much information and position you as the therapist, you are telling them, sorry, I'm not your therapist. I need you to go see the therapist. I'm the lawyer. We speak transparently about our boundaries, our lines, our relationship, our expectations, and you establish yourself as a trustworthy figure. And you also let the client know exactly what's coming down the pike and what they can expect, even if it's like multiple options because we don't know what's going to happen yet. Okay, so we have safety, trustworthiness, and transparency. The third one is we have peer support is one of the principles of trauma-informed lawyering. That means that you are caring about the client holistically. You don't just care about the person who's come into your office and is speaking to you about this issue. You want to know, like, okay, well, where's your closest hospital? And who's your treating physician? And who's your therapist that you call? And what kind of friends do you have? And who's close by you? Who do you talk to most often? Do you go and do like community service work? Like, how deep involved are you in your community? It's making sure that this person has more holistically an entire team set up to support them and their needs as they go through this litigation and like legal issue with you. Because you, as a trauma informed attorney, you understand more holistically what it's going to mean for a person who has experienced a traumatic event or multiple traumatic events to go through the legal system. And whether that's through litigation or through a transactional matter, being a trauma informed attorney means that you are caring about that individual, your client, more holistically and making sure that they are prepared in all ways to pursue their legal claims and not just caring about resolving the matter. You have to care about the actual person and what kind of supports they have in place. There may be a little bit of support that you're giving your clients, again, a little bit of emotional support, but it's not emotional support, and therapy services is not involved in the principles of being a trauma informed lawyer. So, peer support, meaning that you will give some a little bit of support, but you're also going to make sure that they have peer support accessible to them. Okay, so we've talked about safety, we've talked about trustworthiness and transparency, we've talked about peer support. The fourth principle of trauma informed lawyering is collaboration and mutuality. So, again, that does not erase the ethical rules of this profession of what an attorney does versus what a client does. That does not change the roles and expectations of what each person will do during the lawsuit. Okay. The attorney is still responsible for coming up with and executing the legal strategy. That is not the client's job. However, trauma informed attorneys will collaborate more openly than a non trauma informed attorney. So, for example, you may share like documents that you're going to send to the other side and ask the client, do they have any input? Not just, is this factually correct, but is there anything else that you think I should add to this? They may tell the client the strategy and then say, here are two different options of ways that we could go. I'm leaning towards this way. I'm curious what you think we should do. Do you have a preference? Why or why not? Simple things like, for example, when you file a lawsuit, when you actually file it with the court and you initiate, we're going to go to court, we are suing you, that is a public record. Filing a lawsuit is a public record, regardless of what happens in the legal matter themselves. Just the fact that you have filed that filing is a public record. So, a way that I might practice collaboration as a trauma informed attorney who's working with a client who has experienced a lot of trauma or has experienced recently a traumatic experience, I would maybe ask them, hey, would you prefer that I file right away and like get this on record? Do you want a lot of public scrutiny and like attention towards this? Or would you prefer that I keep this more private? Are there things in this lawsuit that you would prefer not come out and that I do not highlight? Or are you like an open book? Like these are areas where I would ask for additional collaboration from my client, where a person who is not a trauma informed attorney would not ask those kinds of questions. They would not collaborate with clients in that way. They would be like, this is what we're doing, period, point blank. A lot of non trauma informed attorneys don't even tell their clients when they've like sent out the demand letter or when they've received a response. I've said this on the channel before, just like a painter who you hire as a contractor isn't going to necessarily tell you when they've painted each individual wooden board on the fence or one side of the fence versus another. A lawyer may often not inform the clients of every little update in the case, but a trauma informed attorney will provide far more updates and communication in this vein of like collaboration and trustworthiness and transparency, safety, etc. The fifth principle that supports why trauma informed attorneys speak and communicate to their clients far more than non trauma informed attorneys is this principle of empowerment, voice, and choice. So people who have gone through a traumatic experience, they didn't have any choice in the matter, right? Like someone who has choice in the matter or agency in the matter, they would get out of the situation or they would report the situation or they would not be in the situation in the first place. So much of trauma, so much of abuse, so much of oppression is tied in with power and control. Someone who has control has power. Someone who does not have control does not have power. And so, one of the things that trauma informed attorneys try to do, and like trauma informed practitioners in general, is we try to return that sense of control to the client. Now, in the legal field, there are so many areas where it is uncertain. There are very few areas where it's extremely certain and we know exactly what's going to happen next. It is far more common for there to be uncertainty and a lack of choice in the law than it is common for there to be an abundance of choice. So, ways that we as trauma informed lawyers try to give empowerment, voice, and choice back to the client is through these ways of collaboration, trustworthiness, transparency, safety, etc. So, for example, when I'm doing a drafting, I'm going to share it with the client and I'm going to ask them, like, how does this make you feel? What do you think about it? What's your input back to me? Again, a lot of attorneys will not care about that. They do not care about giving their clients empowerment, voice, or choice. That's not like a conscious, we don't care about it, F you. That's just like they're not even aware that that's something that the client would be wanting to experience. More frequent check ins and updates and giving them information about what's going on or why nothing has been going on. That gives the client empowerment, voice, choice. It allows them to give you input and share and be a contributor and a participant in their legal matter versus you just telling them this is what's happening, this is how it's going to go. When you give your client information and updates, then they have the option to ask you questions. You can collaborate, you can go back and forth. You can be actual, not full peers, but like partners with your respective roles, partners who are resolving your legal matter versus an attorney saying, I got this, you don't need to worry, I'll let you know when there's something to tell you about. Because workplace matters, right? We've talked about on this channel, sometimes they involve also workers' compensation issues, and that's a different sector of law that's like a related cousin, it's a close family member, it's a half sibling, but it's not like actually the same field. So that would be a completely separate lawsuit. Some people are dealing with like domestic violence and like stalking and like really hardcore interpersonal violence situations at work. And so they have to go get restraining orders because the job won't do it themselves. Your employer can get a restraining order against an employee on your behalf. Okay. They can say one of our employees is being stalked or harassed by another employee, and we can't necessarily fire the problematic employee because of whatever reason, but we will get a restraining order on that employee to protect our other employee. I've worked at places that, refuse to do it, but that's a different story. They can and they legally have an avenue, a very clean, clear avenue for restraining orders. But sometimes people have to go do it independently. And so there are multiple lawsuits sometimes related to the employment matter that I'm dealing with, but it's not my lawsuit. I'm not the lawyer on those other legal matters. And so I have clients who will come to me and talk to me sometimes about their other lawyers, and they'll be really upset of like, I haven't heard from him or them or her, whatever. I haven't heard from the attorney, my other attorneys, in like a couple of months. Or they said that they filed this thing for my other case, but I didn't ever hear anything after that. And I'm always telling my clients, like, that's normal. It's normal. It's normal for an attorney to communicate with you like not as much as you want. Most attorneys are not taking into consideration what it means for the client to be going through this legal matter. And even if they are not making the time to prioritize that. For me, because I've been a client, because I'm a trauma informed attorney, I know how important it is for my clients to receive updates and to just hear from me. What could take me 10, 15 minutes to send an email, go back and forth on a couple of emails with a client, and now they feel like, oh, good, checked in, I still matter. Versus not talking to a client for 2, 3 months, that impact on that client, I understand, is huge. The client who is getting heard from at least once a month, every couple of weeks, they are breathing easier, they are healing faster, they are recovering from the harms that they've endured, which is ultimately what I want. The people who I talk to who are not hearing from their lawyers, who are not getting updates, who do not know what's going on in their legal matters, they are a ball of stress. They are a ball of stress and they are anxious, 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 anxious. So, empowerment, voice, and choice is a huge part of being a trauma informed attorney. The final principle is cultural, historical, gender, like bias, racial issues. Basically, it's the understanding that you, as the lawyer, have considered cultural, historical, racial, gender based, and other identity issues which may be impacting your client or which the client may be experiencing. So it's understanding that you, as a lawyer, you have your own cultural, historical, race, gender biases that can impact the client. And so you're doing extra work to unpack those biases so that they don't come to the table. And it's also understanding that your client likely has cultural, historical, race, gender, and other identity based biases that come to the table and impact how they are experiencing this legal matter. So it just depends. Really, the job of a trauma informed lawyer is to like reduce the level of re traumatization that a client experiences, help with communication by providing additional communication and check-ins and explanations and explaining things in a very like elementary way, not using a lot of legalese. Again, that doesn't mean we can just like erase how fucked up our legal system is and how inadequately it meets people who have experienced traumatic events. But it's our job as trauma-informed attorneys to do the best we can. Okay, so quickly, I just want to review the principles one last time, and then let's close out because I think I've been rambling. Principles of being a trauma-informed attorney: safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and finally, your cultural, historical, gender-based, race-based issues, biases, backgrounds, etc. That's it. If you have questions about what it means to be a trauma-informed attorney, I would be so interested to answer that. If you have questions about trauma, the definition of trauma or traumatic experience, I would be happy to like pull in the additional independent research I've done and academic research I've done and provide additional quotes from other people, third parties who are like experts in their fields and who have done the deep diving, long-term deep diving on trauma and the impacts and like trauma-informed lawyering. I'm happy to like have more of these conversations. This can just be like one in a whole sub playlist of more of these kinds of conversations if y'all want. So drop your comments, drop your questions, let me know if you have them. If not, I want y'all to subscribe if you appreciate what you've seen here today so we can get this in front of more people. Give me a like, give me a share, and let the people know what trauma informed lawyering is and spread the news so that more lawyers become trauma informed lawyers because we need them. Okay. Hopefully this video was informative. Hopefully this video was empowering. And at the end of the day, I hope this helps you get paid. And if you haven't already eaten your emotional support chocolate or giving your emotional support pet a little pet or your blankie a little snuggle, it's time to do that. It's time. Okay, go enjoy your self-care treat and we'll see you again soon for another video. Bye, y'all.